They thought grief had driven her mad. When Catherine's husband died in the spring, the village expected her to mourn quietly, sell their small cottage, and move in with her sister in the city. That's what widows did. That's what was proper. Instead, Catherine took her 7-year-old son, Oliver, and disappeared into the mountains. "She's lost her mind," the villagers whispered at the market. Poor thing. The shock was too much. "Taking that boy into the wilderness," Mrs. Peterson had said, shaking her head at the baker's counter. "It's criminal. Someone should call the authorities." "I heard she's living in a cave," the pharmacist had added, "like some kind of primitive. That poor child will grow up feral." But Catherine wasn't running from grief. She was running toward something, a plan her husband James had shared with her on his deathbed. Those final weeks had been brutal. James had fought the cancer for 2 years, but in the end, it had won. Catherine had sat beside his hospital bed, holding his hand, watching him drift in and out of consciousness. On one of his lucid days, he'd gripped her hand with surprising strength. "The old hermit's cave," he'd whispered, his voice hoarse. "Remember? The one we found hiking when Oliver was a baby? You could build something there, safe, away from everything." Catherine had thought he was delirious from the morphine. "Shh, James. Rest." "No, listen." His eyes had focused on her with sudden intensity. "I've been thinking about it for months. The medical bills. They've taken everything, Katie. Everything. But the land is paid for. That 5 acres I bought years ago, the one everyone said was worthless because of the cliff? It's not worthless. You could build there. I drew up plans. They're in my notebook, the blue one. Promise me you'll look." "I promise," she'd said, tears streaming down her face. "Promise me you'll consider it. Not for me, for Oliver, for yourself. You're stronger than anyone knows, stronger than you know." He died 3 days later. In the weeks after his funeral, as she'd sorted through their finances and realized how little he'd left behind, the medical bills had consumed their savings, their retirement, even the equity in their small cottage. His words had returned to her. She'd found the blue notebook tucked in his desk drawer. Inside were sketches, calculations, detailed plans for a stone house built into the cave entrance they'd discovered years ago. The drawings were beautiful. James had been a talented architect, though he'd never made much money at it. He'd preferred interesting projects over profitable ones. These sketches showed a dwelling that was part medieval cottage, part hobbit hole, part castle. It looked impossible. Catherine had stared at the drawings for hours, then made a decision that would change everything. She'd sold their cottage. The bank would have foreclosed anyway, and used the small amount left after paying debts to buy basic supplies. Then she and Oliver had loaded a borrowed truck and driven to the cave James had claimed would be their salvation. The cave was exactly as she remembered, a massive, natural amphitheater carved into the cliff face, protected from the north wind by the mountain itself, facing south toward the valley. The opening was perhaps 30 feet wide and 20 feet high, with the interior extending back into darkness for at least 40 feet. Water trickled down one wall from a spring somewhere deep in the mountain, creating a natural shower that pooled before draining away through cracks in the floor. "Mom, are we really going to live here?" Oliver had asked, his small voice echoing off the stone. He'd been so quiet since his father's death, so withdrawn. This was the first time in weeks he'd shown any curiosity about anything. "We're going to build a house here," Catherine had corrected, kneeling to his level. "A proper house, the one Dad designed for us. Just wait. It's going to be amazing." The village priest had tried to intervene before they'd left. Father Michael had appeared at the cottage as Catherine was packing the last boxes. "Catherine, please," "This is madness. You're a widow with a young child. Accept help. The church has resources. Your sister has offered you a place. Don't throw your life away on some fantasy." "It's not a fantasy, Father. It's a plan. A good plan. It's pride, false independence. James wouldn't want this for you." Catherine had stopped packing and looked at him steadily. "James gave me this idea. On his deathbed. He drew the plans. He bought the land years ago, knowing we might need it someday. And I'm going to honor what he wanted for us. He was dying, Catherine. In pain. He wasn't thinking clearly. He was thinking more clearly than anyone. He saw what was coming. The bills, the debt, the loss of everything. And he gave me a way forward. I'm taking it." Father Michael had shaken his head. "The village will judge you harshly for this." "The village judged me harshly for marrying a poor architect instead of the banker's son. The village judged James for choosing passion over profit. I'm done living for the village's approval." She'd driven away before he could argue further, Oliver silent in the passenger seat, clutching his father's blue notebook like a treasure. The first week at the cave had been the hardest. Catherine had set up a tent in the protected interior and begun the overwhelming task of making the space livable. She'd cleared debris, fallen rocks, old branches, decades of animal droppings. Every muscle in her body had ached. Her hands had blistered, then calloused. But Oliver had begun to emerge from his shell. He'd helped carry small stones, fetch water from the spring, explore the cave's depths with a flashlight. One evening, as they'd eaten dinner by campfire at the cave entrance, watching the sunset paint the valley in gold, he'd said quietly, "Dad would like this place." "Yes," Catherine had agreed, her throat tight. He would. She'd started with the simplest structure, a stone wall to partially close off the cave entrance, leaving space for a door and windows. The mountainside was littered with limestone fragments, perfect for building. She'd learned to select stones by eye, finding ones that fit together naturally, minimizing the need for mortar. The work was backbreaking. Each stone had to be hauled up, positioned, tested, often repositioned. Catherine had never done physical labor like this. She'd been a librarian before Oliver was born, a life of books and quiet. But she discovered reserves of strength she hadn't known existed. James's notebook became her Bible. He'd included detailed notes on stone selection, mortar mixing ratios, wall thickness for proper insulation. She followed his instructions religiously, imagining his voice guiding her. "Not like that, Katie. See how this stone has a flat side? That's your foundation face." By June, she'd completed 3 feet of wall. It was crude, but solid. Oliver had placed a stone in the wall, too. A small, smooth one James had collected from a beach vacation years ago. "So Dad's part of the house," he'd explained. Catherine had hugged him, fighting tears. But the villagers' mockery had intensified when word spread about what she was doing. Catherine had needed supplies regularly: lumber, cement, nails, tools she couldn't borrow. Every trip to the village hardware store had been an exercise in humiliation. "Building a house? You?" The owner, Mr. Carlson, had laughed the first time she'd come in with James's detailed supply list. "Lady, you don't know the first thing about construction. Where's your contractor?" "I'm the contractor." He'd actually snorted. "You're going to build an entire house? Yourself? In a cave?" "Yes. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. What are you, a caveman?" "I'm a widow with limited options and unlimited determination. Will you sell me the lumber or not?" He'd sold it, but she'd heard him laughing with other customers as she loaded her truck. "Crazy widow thinks she's Bob the Builder. Give her a month before she gives up and comes crawling back to reality. The story had spread. People drove up the winding mountain road just to gawk at the crazy widow building a castle in the sky. They'd park on the access road and hike up with cameras, treating her like a roadside attraction. One Saturday in July, a group of teenagers had shown up drunk, throwing rocks at the cave entrance, shouting insults. "Crazy lady! Cave woman! Where's your husband?" "Oh, right, dead." Catherine had emerged from the cave with a hammer in her hand and such fury in her eyes that they'd stumbled backward. "Get off my property," she'd said, her voice deadly calm. "Now, or I call the sheriff." "For what? We're just looking." "Trespassing, vandalism, harassment, take your pick. You have 10 seconds. They'd left, but not before one of them had spray-painted "crazy" on a boulder near the access road. Oliver had seen it the next day. "Mom, why do they hate us?" Catherine had knelt beside him. "They don't hate us, sweetheart. They're afraid. When someone does something different, something brave, it scares people who aren't brave enough to do it themselves. So they try to make the brave person feel small. But we're not small, are we?" "No," Oliver had said, standing straighter. "We're building something Dad designed. That makes us big." Exactly. By August, the entrance wall was complete. 8 feet high, 3 feet thick, with carefully placed openings for a door and 2 windows. Catherine had learned to cut stones to fit, to layer them properly, to waterproof the mortar joints with techniques she'd found in old masonry books from the library. She'd installed a heavy wooden door she'd built herself, following James's drawings. It wasn't perfect, but it was solid, and it locked. The first night they'd slept behind that locked door, Catherine had felt something inside her relax. They were safe, protected. This was becoming real. Her sister Rachel had visited once in late August, hiking up the steep path in inappropriate shoes, complaining the entire way. When she'd finally reached the cave and seen what Catherine had built, she'd stopped mid-complaint. "Oh my God," she'd breathed. "Katie, this is... You actually built this?" "I'm still building it." Rachel had walked around the entrance wall, running her hand along the stones. "It's so solid. I thought it would be like a pile of rocks or something. But this is real construction." James designed it well. Rachel had turned, tears in her eyes. "Katie, I'm sorry. I've been so awful to you. Saying you were crazy, telling Mom you needed intervention. But this..." She gestured helplessly at the structure. "This is amazing. You're amazing." For a moment, Catherine had felt hope. Maybe she'd have an ally, someone who understood. But then Rachel had continued. "But you can't stay here. It's still no life for Oliver. He needs school, friends, normalcy. You've proved you can do this. Now come back to civilization. Come live with me. I have that extra bedroom." And Catherine had realized Rachel didn't understand at all. She admired the construction, but she still thought this was a project, a phase, something Catherine would outgrow. "This is our home, Rachel. Oliver and I are staying. But the winter..." "We'll be fine." Rachel had left, promising to visit again, but never did. Catherine had watched her sister descend the trail and felt the loneliness settle deeper. She was doing this alone, truly alone. But the work continued. By September, Catherine had divided the interior with wooden partition walls, creating distinct rooms: a bedroom for Oliver with a window overlooking the valley, a bedroom for herself in the cave's deepest, quietest section, and a common living area with the cooking space along one side. She'd built furniture from lumber and salvaged wood: a sturdy table, 4 chairs, bed frames with rope mattresses stuffed with mountain grass. A building inspector had hiked up in October, responding to multiple complaints from villagers. He'd expected to condemn the structure, to find obvious code violations, to have ammunition to shut this crazy project down. Instead, he'd spent 2 hours examining everything, making notes, taking photos. Finally, he'd turned to Catherine, his expression bemused. "Ma'am, I'll be honest. I came up here expecting a disaster. But this is, well, it's unconventional certainly, but structurally sound. Your stonework is better than what I see in half the contractors' projects I inspect. And you have running water?" He'd examined her collection system, the way she'd channeled the spring water into a stone basin with a clever overflow system. "This is ingenious. Did you design this yourself?" "My husband designed it. I built it." "Your husband was a smart man, and you're clearly a talented builder." He'd signed off on his report. "You're within code, unusual, but legal. I'll file this with the county." That hadn't stopped the mockery. If anything, it had intensified. People seemed angry that she'd succeeded this far, as if her success was an insult to their predictions of failure. Catherine's mother had called in November, just before the first snow. "Catherine Marie, I'm begging you. Come home. Bring Oliver. You've made your point. You can do this. Now stop before it becomes tragic. Mom, this is home. This stone house is more stable than any apartment I could afford. We have water, heat, food. We're safe here. You're living in a cave. I'm living in a house I built with my own hands, a house my husband designed, a house that's paid for and will never be foreclosed on. Can you say the same about your place?" Her mother had hung up. The isolation had been complete then. No family support, no friends. Her old friends from the village had stopped calling, uncomfortable with her choices. Just Catherine and Oliver and the stone house that grew more finished each day. But Oliver was thriving. He spent hours exploring the mountainside, collecting interesting rocks and arranging them by type. Catherine taught him math using their construction projects, calculating volumes, measuring angles, determining load-bearing capacities. She taught him literature by reading aloud each evening by lamplight. They'd worked through half of Tolkien's Middle-earth saga, appropriate for a boy living in a stone dwelling carved into a mountain. "Tell me again about Dad," Oliver said one night in November, nestled in his bed as Catherine tucked him in. It had become a ritual. "He was brave," Catherine began, as she always did, "and creative, and he saw possibilities where others saw nothing. He looked at this cave and saw a home. He looked at me and saw someone strong enough to build it. Was he right? What do you think?" Oliver had looked around his bedroom, at the stone walls Catherine had carefully finished, at the wooden shelves she'd built to hold his rocks and books, at the window that framed a perfect view of stars. He was right. "You're the strongest person I know." Catherine had kissed his forehead, fighting tears. "We're strong together. You and me and Dad's dream." November brought the first serious warnings. Meteorologists were predicting an unusually harsh winter, potentially historic. The village began preparing earnestly, stocking supplies, checking generators, reinforcing roofs, buying extra heating fuel. Catherine prepared too, but differently. She'd spent the autumn gathering firewood obsessively, stacking it in the dry rear portion of the cave until she had a supply she estimated would last 4 months of constant burning. She'd insulated the entrance wall with thick layers of moss and clay mixed with straw, creating an effective barrier against wind. She'd purchased and stored dried goods, canned foods, medical supplies, lamp oil, candles. She'd bought snowshoes, heavy winter gear, emergency blankets. The hardware store owner had rung up her supplies with a smirk. Planning to survive the apocalypse up there? Planning to survive winter. You should too. Lady, I've lived through 40 winters in this valley. I think I know how to prepare. Good, Catherine had said evenly. Then we'll both be fine. But she'd seen his shelves. Low stock, few customers buying extra supplies. The village was complacent. They'd survived every winter. They'd survived this one. Catherine wasn't taking chances. The first snow came in late November, light and beautiful. Catherine and Oliver had stood at their doorway, watching it fall across the valley below. Their stone house stayed warm, the wood stove glowing, the cave's thermal mass holding the heat. They were ready. Then December arrived with apocalyptic fury. The storm hit on December 3rd, a massive system that meteorologists started calling unprecedented within hours. 3 feet of snow fell in the first 24 hours, then another 2 feet, then another. The temperature plunged to -15, then -20, then -25 degrees Fahrenheit. Wind gusts reached 70 miles per hour, creating whiteout conditions and wind chills that could kill exposed skin in minutes. In the village below, the crisis unfolded rapidly. The power grid failed on day 2, the weight of snow on lines, the ice on transformers, the strain of everyone running electric heaters simultaneously. The backup generators at the community center ran out of fuel by day 5. The roads were completely impassable, buried under 6 feet of drifted snow. The propane delivery trucks couldn't get through. The grocery store's emergency supplies ran out by day 7. People were trapped in their homes without heat, without power, with dwindling food supplies. In the stone house in the cliff, Catherine and Oliver were fine. The cave's position protected them from the worst winds. The entrance faced south, away from the northern blasts that were tearing roofs off houses in the village. The stone walls, 3 feet thick, held the heat from their wood stove with remarkable efficiency. Catherine burned wood steadily, but not frantically. The cave itself stayed at about 45 degrees, even without the stove, and the fire brought their living area to a comfortable 65. They had light from oil lamps and candles. They had food from their stores, canned vegetables, dried beans, rice, flour for bread. They had water from the spring, which never froze because it came from deep within the mountain's geothermal system. They had books to read by lamplight, games to play, music from Oliver's harmonica. Mom, are the people in the village okay? Oliver asked on day 6, peering out through their window at the white void beyond. I hope so, sweetheart. But Catherine was deeply worried. She couldn't see the valley. It was invisible under snow and darkness. No lights at night, which meant the power was still out. She thought about elderly Mrs. Peterson, who lived alone, about the families with small children, about her mother, 2 hours away, who always kept her house too cold to save money on heating. On day 8, when the snow finally stopped, but the temperature remained brutally low, Catherine made a decision. Oliver, I need you to stay here. Keep the stove going. You know how. I'm going down to the village. Mom, no. It's too dangerous. People might need help. I have to check. She'd strapped on the snowshoes the hardware store owner had mocked, loaded a pack with extra food and medical supplies, and headed down the mountain. It took 3 hours of exhausting work, but she was strong from months of construction, and the physical exertion kept her warm despite the negative temperatures. What she found in the village broke her heart. Houses were dark and silent. Some had broken windows from the wind. The streets were canyons of snow. She made her way to the community center, which she could see had some kind of light inside, candles or battery lamps. Inside, she found nearly 200 people huddled together. The backup generator had failed, and the building was barely warmer than outside. People were wrapped in every blanket and coat they owned, but Catherine could see the signs of hypothermia, shivering, confusion, lethargy. Children were crying. The elderly were frighteningly still. The priest saw her first. Father Michael's face went from surprise to shame to desperate hope. "Catherine, you made it down from the mountain. We're fine. Warm, fed, safe. What do you need?" Over the next hour, Catherine assessed the situation. They had almost no food left. The propane heaters had run out of fuel. Several people needed medical attention, but the roads were too blocked for ambulances. The village was in crisis, and no help was coming soon. "How are you surviving?" Mrs. Peterson asked, her voice thin and weak. "Up there in that cave?" Catherine knelt beside the old woman, tucking an extra blanket around her from her pack. "The cave stays warm. The stone holds heat. My wood stove is efficient, and I prepared." "We mocked you," Mrs. Peterson whispered. "I called it child abuse. I signed that petition. I'm so sorry." "It's okay," Catherine said, though it wasn't, not really. "Right now, we need to focus on getting you through this." Over the next 3 weeks, Catherine became a lifeline. She couldn't bring everyone up to her small stone house. It was impossible and would deplete her supplies in days. But she could help. She made the trip down every other day, carrying supplies, firewood from her stockpile, food from her stores, medical supplies. She taught people how to melt snow for water properly, how to layer clothing for maximum warmth, how to conserve body heat. She brought news that help was coming. She'd hiked to a high point where her emergency radio could get reception, and she'd learned that the National Guard was working to clear roads. The hardware store owner, Mr. Carlson, saw her arrive on day 10. He'd lost weight, his face was gaunt, but he was alive. "You were right," he said simply. "About everything. The preparation, the cave, all of it." "I didn't want to be right," Catherine said. "I just wanted to be safe." "How did you know? How did you see this coming when none of us did?" Catherine thought about James, dying in his hospital bed, holding her hand. "Someone who loved me very much taught me to see possibilities, to prepare for the worst while hoping for the best, to never assume that systems would always work." Young families thanked her tearfully for the food she brought their children. Elderly people squeezed her hand with gratitude for the warmth of the firewood. The priest blessed her, though she wondered what right he had after trying to stop her. On day 15, Oliver insisted on coming with her on the supply run. Catherine was hesitant, but he'd argued, "Dad designed the house for both of us. If you're helping because of what he built, I should help too." Together, they'd made the journey, Oliver struggling but determined on his smaller snowshoes. When they'd reached the community center, the children there had stared at him with something like awe. This boy from the mountain who was healthy and strong while they were weak and hungry. Oliver had shared his lunch with 3 of them, and Catherine had felt a fierce pride that momentarily overwhelmed her exhaustion. By late December, emergency services finally reached the village. The National Guard had cleared the main highway, and supplies began flowing in. Power was gradually restored, though it would take weeks for full repairs. The crisis wasn't over, but the worst had passed. Catherine and Oliver made one final trip down, this time just to check on people. Father Michael met them at the church. "Catherine, I owe you an apology. More than an apology. You saved lives. Dozens of lives. If you hadn't been prepared, if you hadn't shared what you had..." He shook his head. I called your faith pride. I was wrong. Your faith in your husband's vision, in your own strength, that saved this village. I didn't do it for the village, Catherine said honestly. I did it for my son. The village just happened to benefit. Still, thank you. Others echoed his thanks. Mrs. Peterson, recovered now, hugged Catherine and wept. The hardware store owner offered her a permanent discount on any supplies. Not that you probably need anything from me anymore. Young families wanted to know how she'd built the stone house, whether she'd helped them build something similar. The mockery had completely evaporated, replaced by respect. But Catherine felt the distance it created. She was no longer one of them. She was the woman who'd been right, who'd survived, who'd saved them. It was a lonely kind of victory. January brought more snow, though nothing like December's apocalypse. The village slowly recovered, but something had fundamentally changed. People began talking about preparedness, about the fragility of the systems they'd taken for granted. And Catherine's phone wouldn't stop ringing. A regional newspaper wanted a feature story. Widow's stone house withstands historic storm. Architectural magazines requested photos and plans. A reality TV show about survivalists wanted to feature her. Her sister called weekly, apologizing, praising, begging Catherine to forgive her doubts. Most surprisingly, young people started showing up. Architects, builders, back to the land enthusiasts. They hiked up to see the stone house, asked questions, took notes. Catherine found herself teaching, sharing James's plans, explaining the principles of thermal mass and natural insulation. One couple in particular, Ben and Sophie, both architects from the city, kept coming back. They'd been impressed by the initial visit, then fascinated, then obsessed. We're designing an eco-village, Sophie had explained on their third visit. Sustainable cliff dwellings, earth-sheltered homes, minimal environmental impact. But we keep running into problems you've already solved. Would you consider consulting on the project? They'd offered real money, more than Catherine had seen in years. I'm not an architect, she'd protested. No, Ben had agreed. You're better. You're a builder with practical experience. You've lived through the worst winter in a century in a structure you built yourself. That's worth more than any degree. Catherine had looked at Oliver, who'd been listening intently. What do you think, buddy? Should Mom be a consultant? Dad would say yes, Oliver had said confidently. He'd say you earned it. So Catherine had accepted, and over the following months, a new career emerged. She consulted on sustainable building projects, designed cave dwellings and earth-sheltered homes, taught workshops on stone masonry and natural construction. People paid well for her expertise, the expertise she'd gained from James's notebooks and her own desperate need to create shelter. By spring, Catherine had saved enough money to make improvements to their stone house. She added a small greenhouse extension to the entrance, using salvaged windows, creating a space to grow vegetables year-round. She installed a more efficient water heating system. She built a small workshop in one of the cave's side chambers. Other families began building on the mountain too, buying plots near Catherine's land, creating their own sustainable dwellings. What had begun as a lonely refuge was becoming a community, but a different kind of community, built on shared values of preparedness and self-reliance. On the anniversary of James's death, Catherine stood at the entrance to their home, always theirs in her mind. The valley below was green now, wildflowers dotting the meadows. She held the blue notebook, its pages worn from constant reference during construction. I did it, she whispered. Everyone mocked us. Everyone said I was crazy. But I built what you designed, James. And it's beautiful. It's strong. It saved us. It saved others. Behind her, she heard Oliver laughing with children from the other mountain families, heard the sound of hammers as Ben and Sophie worked on their own cliff dwelling nearby, heard music from someone's radio, the normalcy of life continuing. The mockery had turned to admiration. The isolation had turned to community. The grief had turned to purpose. Catherine touched the stone wall she'd built with her own hands, felt its solid reality under her palm, felt the strength she'd forged from loss and determination. Some people built walls to keep the world out. She'd built walls to create a shelter strong enough that she could eventually let the world back in, on her terms. "Mom," Oliver called from inside. "Sophie wants to know if you'll show her your water collection system design." Catherine smiled, tucked James's notebook under her arm, and went inside. Inside the home she'd carved from stone and stubbornness, from loss and love, from the last gift a dying man had given his wife, the courage to build something impossible. They'd called her crazy. They'd been wrong. And now, when winter came again, everyone would be ready, because the widow in the stone house had taught them all how to survive.